The Asphodel Archives is where history is treated as evidence, not nostalgia. Here we examine how societies have tried to manage death when certainty was unavailable, authority was contested, and fear filled the gaps left by medicine, law, and belief. These episodes focus on moments when death was not a clear boundary, but a problem to be solved. They trace how ritual, technology, commerce, and class shaped what people believed a safe death looked like, and who was allowed to have one. I am Karen's intern. Today's archive opens in the 19th century, when the fear of premature burial was not superstition, but a plausible outcome of medical uncertainty. This is the story of taphophobia, of safety coffins, and of a time when being declared dead was a matter of opinion rather than proof. In 1867, the London Times published a story that sent a shiver through the drawing rooms of the aristocracy. It detailed the exhumation of a young woman whose coffin lid, upon being raised, revealed a horrifying sight. The silk lining was shredded, and her face was frozen in a silent scream. In the 19th century, this wasn't just a ghost story. It was a statistical possibility. To understand the safety coffin, we have to understand the Great Medical Doubt. Before the mid-1800s, death was a feeling more than a fact. The primary cause of this terror was catalepsy, a medical condition where a patient's pulse and breathing slow to a point where they are imperceptible to the human eye. Combine this with the frequent outbreaks of cholera, which could put a person into a death-like state of dehydration and collapse, and you have a recipe for disaster. But it wasn't just medicine, it was literature. This was the era of Edgar Allan Poe. His stories, like The Premature Burial and The Fall of the House of Usher, weren't seen as pure fiction. They were seen as warnings. Poe tapped into a primal fear that the Victorian public was already obsessing over. For the literate class, reading about a woman clutched by the hand of death only to wake up in a crypt wasn't entertainment. It was a call to action. By the mid-Victorian era, the patent offices of London, Paris, and Washington, D.C. were flooded with life-preserving apparatus for the dead. The most famous was Bateson's revival bell. Developed by George Bateson in 1852, it was marketed to the upper crust as the ultimate insurance policy. A cord was tied to the hand of the deceased and threaded through a tube to a bell on the headstone. But the designs grew increasingly Gothic. Christian Eisenbrandt designed a coffin with a spring-loaded lid that would fly open at the slightest movement of the chest. Count Michel de Carny's Carnicki took it further. His system included a breathing tube that would automatically open to provide fresh air the moment the occupant moved, while simultaneously firing a flare and ringing a bell. Kana. Insert mid-roll ad here. Transition to trust and will. The bridge should be, the Victorians used bells, we use legal clarity. Act 3. The economy of the safe death, 1600 to 2200. Tone, serious, economic focus. Audio cue, clinking of heavy coins. This leads us to the most vital question. Who was this for? A safety coffin was not a democratic tool. It was a luxury product. In 1880, a standard coffin might cost a few shillings, but a patented safety apparatus could cost upwards of £50, the equivalent of several $1,000s today. This created a fascinating social divide. The poor were buried in pauper pits, where bodies were stacked. They had no hope of revival. But the wealthy, the factory owners, the lords, the rising middle class, they purchased grave security. However, the cost didn't stop at the coffin. You needed the watchman. Cemeteries like Highgate in London began charging vigilance fees. You were paying for a man to walk the paths at 2 a.m., listening for the faint ting of a bell. If you were wealthy enough, you didn't just buy a coffin, you bought a dedicated guard for your first 48 hours in the soil. On the European continent, especially in Germany, they took a more communal approach, the Leichenhaus or corpse house. These were grand neoclassical halls where the dead were laid out on slabs for 3 days before burial. To ensure no one was buried alive, a system of wires was attached to every single corpse's fingers. These wires led to a central alarm room. The guards in these rooms lived in a state of constant tension, yet the historical records tell a chilling story. In nearly a century of operation in Frankfurt, the bells almost never rang for a living person. When they did ring, it was the sound of putrefaction. As the body decays, gases build up, causing limbs to twitch or fingers to curl. Imagine being a guard in 1870, hearing a bell ring in the dark, running to the slab, only to find a body that was very much dead, but moving nonetheless. Why did it stop? It wasn't because we stopped being afraid. It was because the industry changed. The rise of embalming during the American Civil War and its subsequent spread to Europe provided the ultimate safety. Once a body is embalmed, there is no waking up. The safety coffin faded into a curiosity of history, a relic of a time when we trusted a blacksmith more than a doctor. Today, we manage our fear of the unknown with signatures, digital vaults, and insurance. We have traded the brass bell for the last will and testament. Thank you for spending 30 minutes in the archives. I am Karen's intern. If you want to ensure your own legacy is secure without needing a breathing tube, check our links below. Until next time, keep the archives open.